Hello, friends, and welcome to another exciting episode of Today with Tally. The mission and goal of this podcast is to bring an engaging conversation that will add value to the lives of everyday people. We will inspire, encourage, educate, and tell the stories of America's finest men and women in an effort to motivate you to live your life to its fullest potential. Be sure to follow us on social media and search Today with Tally. Be sure to subscribe, follow, and share the program as well. Ladies and gentlemen, your host of the evening, Mr. Brian Tally.
Welcome back to Today with Tally podcast, where we add real life value to the lives of everyday people. We are on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Anchor FM, Spotify, and About Face Radio. Simply search Today with Tally. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe to get every episode and stay up to date with the latest and greatest our guests and this show has to offer. Folks, today's show sponsor is author John Henley. Now, John is a respected, best-selling author who served in the U.S. Navy on submarines and then went on to serve as an officer of the CIA. He is now living out his dream as an author and is giving back to the community he cares deeply about. If you are an aspiring author and need a mentor, perhaps you want to collaborate with the best-selling author, contact author John Henley today. John has developed a unique program that specializes in helping military veteran authors get recognized and get you the exposure you need to be a successful author. John believes that writing, creating, and using your imagination and putting a book together is a healthy way to deal with post-traumatic stress and is a wonderful coping strategy to occupy your mind, body, and spirit while surrounding yourself with a positive and meaningful hobby. Contact author John Henley today, and he can give you that final push and encouragement to reach your goals. Visit authorjohnhenley.com. That's authorjohnhenley.com and select your story and follow the prompts. And once you're there, check out his new book release, Charlie. It is a magnificent book. It is a great military thriller, and you will be very happy that you did. Now, folks, we have a very special guest joining us on today's program, and let me set this up for you because this is a very, very alarming story here that definitely needs a lot of attention, and it has garnered a lot of attention. It has garnered national attention, but we're getting to the point where we need the accountability and the transparency that these U.S. Army soldiers deserve. Now, the Army National Guard was seeking new recruits in 2005. They began the Guard Recruiting Assistant Program known as GRAP. Now, these soldiers were requested by their commanders to serve as personnel ambassadors for the Army National Guard in an effort to bolster lagging enlistments while our country was involved in two wars. And in 2005, this was the height of the war and recruitment was down. Now, approximately 106,000 of these soldiers became active recruiting assistants in their off time, bringing close to 150,000 new enlistees into this program. Now, by all measures, this was a uniquely successful program. A private company administered GRAP, DocuPack, an advertising specialties company based in Alabama. They were awarded a $350 million contract by the government to promote, manage, administer, and monitor this GRAP program. DocuPack, in turn, hired the off-duty soldiers as private contractors, calling them recruiting assistants. DocuPack offered a monetary recruitment incentive for every soldier enlisted. They were paid up to $2,000 per soldier to put them in, to recruit them into the Army, and up to $7,500 for officers. Now, although the program was deemed a recruiting success, GRAP's contracting and administrative issues became the subject of a widespread, decades-long investigation. But instead of examining the program's operational flaws, the people who had done only what they were commanded to do became the targets of criminal investigation. This massive investigation revealed significant flaws in how military law enforcement organizations are allowed to operate with a complete lack of oversight from an independent entity. The far-reaching implications of that investigation are what created Defend Our Protectors. The Army's Criminal Investigation Division exceeded its authority and jurisdiction and blurred the lines between military justice and civilian law. Service members and veterans were left without recourse as their constitutional rights were trampled, their lives and their careers destroyed. The CID investigation into the Guard Recruiting Assistance Program is an example of this, but the problem is systemic. And now with that, I would like to bring onto the program the executive director and the founder of Defend Our Protectors, Liz Ullman. How are you, Matt?
I'm good. Thanks, Brian.
You know, it's tough reading that. You know, I mean, it really is to see how this all has unfolded. And, you know, I've done my due diligence and I've done a lot of research on this over the last month or so. And I even had a GRAP soldier victim on here this last week. And the stuff I've seen online and in the news, I mean, it is alarming. It is truly alarming.
It's both alarming and heartbreaking. I call it a tragedy of enormous proportions because these it's affected the men and women who swore on their lives to defend our country, and then our country turned against them. And that is a betrayal that no one's ever going to overcome. I hear absolutely heart-wrenching stories from people who have been involved in this investigation.
Now, you are not a veteran yourself. You are a strong veteran advocate. And, you know, you have dedicated your life really to working to right a very damaging wrong to our American soldiers who have suffered the fate of this unlawful investigation, these unlawful investigations set forth by the Army CID. What inspired you to begin this type of work of veteran advocacy?
Well, it started with one friend. I was watching the national news one night, and I heard my friend's son name mentioned with regard to being charged with felony theft against the United States. And this young man was a Green Beret. He had just returned home from a combat deployment in Afghanistan. He is a righteous, wonderful individual, and the thought of him committing any kind of felony, any kind of crime against the country that he was serving was shocking. So I called my friend and asked if I could help. Luke was there with his court documents. They lived just up the street. So I walked up and offered to help him read his court documents and try and make sense of what he was indicted for. We immediately saw disconnects. It was obvious from the indictment that the CID agent said that because of the recruits didn't remember being recruited by Luke had stolen the money, essentially. And I asked Luke, were you supposed to stay in touch with them? He had recruited them 8 years before this indictment. And he said, no, there was no requirement. We were just supposed to get them in the door, get them in front of an official recruitment officer and help them enlist. And that was the end of it. So the fact that they didn't remember Luke was suspicious. We then began looking at the document that CID prepared, calling it the GRAP handbook, and saw that the rules, the protocols that DocuPack had created for the recruiting assistants to follow to achieve an actual enlistment varied significantly from the published documents that DocuPack had put out. And one specific rule was in question, and that was, how was the Social Security of the new recruit handled? It's so complicated and strange. It's almost, I tell this story, people don't believe it. But the DocuPack rule was that the DocuPack recruiting assistant, like my friend Luke, was supposed to go to the official Guard recruiter with this new potential enlistee. The official Guard recruiter was supposed to give PII, personal identifying information, to the DocuPack recruiting assistant to enter into the DocuPack system, so DocuPack could track the enlistment process. And so Social Security number goes from the official Guard recruiter to the DocuPack recruiting assistant. Recruiting assistant enters it. In the handbook that CID produced, they completely eliminated the role of the official Guard recruiter and said that the Social Security number had to go from the potential recruit to the DocuPack recruiting assistant, bypassing the official Guard recruiter. So people who followed the rules that they were given were charged with identity theft, wire fraud, and theft against the United States. And the recruiters who worked with the DocuPack recruiting assistants were charged with the same crimes.
An honorable man in Luke, a combat veteran, a special forces Green Beret soldier, being charged with felony theft against the United States. Now, those are some very serious allegations to be put on an honorable man's name. And this came as a surprise somewhat 8 years later. Now, this seems like an absolute bait and switch type program here. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, bait and switch, I guess, is a good way to describe it. I saw it as Luke was being framed. Mm-hmm. And as it turned out, every single DocuPack recruiting assistant who was investigated, and that was almost all 100,000 of them, were charged with the exact same crime, this wire fraud, identity theft, felony theft against the United States, using the exact same evidence and the exact same investigative protocols, 100,000 people. In reality, the only thing these people had in common was that they had all worked for DocuPack.
You know, so this is kind of hard to put on there, and I meant bait and switch as in, hey, we're going to give you $2,000 per soldier that you recruit because we need help. And we're going to give you $7,500 per officer that you can recruit. And, you know, a lot of soldiers that were very influential. I mean, especially a Green Beret, you know, hey, look, become a Green Beret like me. You know, a lot of guys look up to people like that. So for Luke, it was probably pretty easy to help him recruit folks to join the military. And again, the incentive there was, we're pretty much going to give you bonuses, for helping, bring in recruits to help a struggling recruiting program. Now, in my eyes here, DocuPack, I've always known them to be like a mass mailing company, right?
Yeah, DocuPack was, and they basically developed swag. They imprinted the National Guard's name and logo on basketballs and water bottles and T-shirts and caps. That's what they did. They had huge warehouses in Birmingham, and they were a purveyor of stuff. I want to go back and correct something you said, though, because you used the word bonus, and it actually was incentive pay rather than a bonus. And that is sort of a clarification that the money came from DocuPack as incentive pay as opposed to the military as a bonus. And that's an important distinction because these recruiting assistants were working for a private company. They were subcontractors. They got 1099s at the end of the year. They weren't working for the military. So when I look at this unlawful investigation, why is CID investigating how somebody works for a private employer? It's a little bit like CID going into an Amazon warehouse and saying, you're packing the boxes wrong. I'm charging you with mail fraud. It just makes no sense.
Why did the Army farm this out to DocuPack? Why didn't the Army keep this in-house and keep this all within the government?
Well, that's a good question. And all I can do is surmise. I don't know exactly. But DocuPack had been a high-profile purveyor of swag. And they were also involved in a very high profile sponsorship of Dale Earnhardt's race car at NASCAR. So DocuPack could get things done quickly, and the Guard needed enlistees quickly. And so the director of the National Guard Bureau, General Clyde Vaughn, and his colonel who was in charge of the Recruitment and Retention Command, Mike Jones, went to the president of DocuPack, Phil Crane, and said, you can get this done quickly. We're going to give you a bridge contract from your marketing contract of several $100 million. Kindly create an incentive recruiting program and roll it out quickly. And they did. 5 months, I think it was 5 months later, GRAP was invented after the initial idea was hatched.
And it was a very successful program. Of course, you're going to lay out some good incentives to folks that don't make a lot of money to help improve, their army and our country. Obviously, a country at war, was a win-win situation for them. So, I mean, when we get into stories like this, again, I just get so dumbfounded because I'm like, how can something like this even happen? Now, what happened? What was the cause of concern where the Army CID said, oh, there's fraud being committed here? How did that all come to light?
It was a massaging of several different Army audits. GRAP was a tremendous recruiting success. It brought in a lot of people very quickly. It was an administrative train wreck. It violated almost every purchasing regulation that existed in government. It was a sole source contract. Nobody else could bid on the original GRAP concept. And it was a task order on a marketing contract that created an entirely different program. So that was determined to be illegal. So all of these problems, the director of the National Guard Bureau, General Vaughn, was cited for misuse of government funds. The Colonel, Mike Jones, was cited for exerting undue command influence. They received no punishment. And a few years later, and this is where I am offering my opinion because I can't prove it, but the Army needed a different narrative. At the time, there was sexual assault going on in the Army, and Congress was looking at a way to pull the investigation of serious crimes out of CID and put it under civilian control. And CID needed a rescue mechanism. So in a Senate hearing on fraud, abuse in government contracts, the director of CID announced that there was $100 million worth of fraud in GRAP, and the people who had committed it were the people who earned the money by recruiting. And it was, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it was a lie, because there wasn't $100 million worth of fraud. There wasn't $99 million worth of fraud. But it gave the CID the opportunity to put headlines out into the newspaper and go big. They had just identified a crime that only CID could handle, and they put 200 reserve agents on it and began investigating. Was
there any wrongdoing or any findings of fraud?
Yes. And hideous irony, the biggest fraud in the recruiting assistance programs were in the Army and the Army Reserve, not even the National Guard. And those cases were adjudicated years before the widespread GRAP investigation even began. So this GRAP investigation was a takedown of the National Guard by the Army. And other people have conjectured that with the amount of training budget and recruiting money and equipment that was going to the National Guard for combat-related purposes, because the Guard was so heavily involved in these combat missions, the Army wanted to redirect those funds away from the National Guard and back to the Army. And so they painted the National Guard as this massive criminal enterprise.
So the money just went in the circle. we're going to give you an incentive. We're going to pay you. We're going to charge you with the crime. We're going to get our money back.
Pretty much, yeah. They didn't get their money back because there wasn't that. Once they began investigating GRAP, I don't even think they found $1 million worth of fraud. And some of that money was surrendered by simple government overreach. People just said, here's my $5,000, leave me alone.
Yeah, I mean, there's $350
million doing it.
Right. And to only find $1 million in fraud, waste, and abuse, like the military likes to call it, to only have $1 million out of 350 million of it be fraud, and the majority of it were coming from the active duty side and not the National Guard side. Again, that's a very, very, very low number. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the Army went out and painted everybody with a broad brush and said, if you even took part of this program, you are now under investigation.
Right. Well, and it gets even worse than that, because if, as it turned out, they weren't just under investigation, the Army titled those who were under investigation and then listed them in criminal databases as arrested for felony theft against the United States, even when no arrest occurred. Most of the people didn't know that they were even being investigated until they couldn't pass a background check. People were losing professional licenses. Teachers couldn't teach. Nurses couldn't renew a medical license. People couldn't get loans, a mortgage, all because CID entered their names in a criminal database for simply being investigated.
Was there any due process here? I just having a hard time seeing how the Army CID could label every single one of these National Guard soldiers as felons and committing crimes against the U.S. government for fraud if there was no right to due process. Did these guys ever have their day in court?
No, there was no arrest record. There was no due process. This is a law enforcement agency, basically serving as judge, jury, and executioner.
What was the motivation of Army CID to do this?
Well, they were reservists, and as long as they stayed on duty in the GRAP investigation, they were earning money. So they could drag out these investigations and go from person to person to person and keep getting their additional income. And it almost became a guilt by algorithm that if they investigated a recruiting assistant, then they were going to investigate the official Guard recruiter who worked with the recruiting assistant. And so everybody who worked with anybody else became a subject of an investigation.
What type of leadership, and I'm talking at the highest level of the Army National Guard, what type of leadership could even allow something like this to even happen without coming in and stepping in and saying, guys, well, we got to back up a little bit here. We need to have a meeting about this because this is not correct and this is not right. I just don't. Does Army CID have complete control over everything that they do without upper leadership coming in and stopping them?
It certainly is that way. And I got to tell you, I've been working on this now for more than 9 years, and more than a dozen times I thought, where the hell is the National Guard Bureau on this? They're letting some retiree sitting at her dining room table lead the charge. And no one is standing up for their troops. And I'm going to have to call out General Clyde Vaughn again. He was the director of the National Guard Bureau when GRAP was invented, and he has been silent on this issue throughout. And he knew what was going on in GRAP. Why hasn't he spoken out on behalf of the soldiers that he pushed into this program?
You know, the Army National Guard, CID, okay, they investigated 100,000 soldiers. So pretty much whoever earned money helping recruit through the GRAP program was already slated as a criminal, as a felon, as somebody that was being charged with serious crimes. But they didn't know it. They didn't know it. So a lot of these soldiers were getting out, and like you said, they were beginning their lives in the civilian sector until they went to go, say, get a clearance, to get a good job, to buy a home, a car, to get a credit card. They were flagged as criminals without them even knowing.
Exactly. And those who were in the service, my friend Luke was barred from reenlistment. All he wanted to do was serve his country. And his commander, the tag here in Colorado, said, no, you cannot, and pushed him out. And that happened across the board. People were barred from reenlistment. They were shoved out of the Army. They tried to salvage their careers. And when they couldn't, they went into the civilian sector and then couldn't get a job there. These people were ruined. And there wasn't any oversight. There wasn't any accountability. There wasn't anyone saying that this was wrong. The general, the head of CID at the time, David Quantock, when he left CID, he became Inspector General of the Army. So when people were complaining to the IG about this rogue investigation, those complaints went to the person who started this rogue investigation.
These soldiers were never arrested, and they were all reported to the National Crime Information Center and were classified as arrests. That right there is, I mean, talk about unconstitutional. You have soldiers in there that raise their right hand to support, defend, and uphold the Constitution of the United States of America, while the very folks that they're serving for, the very government that they are serving for, have completely turned their backs on them and have betrayed them because of an incentive program that they laid out for them to help them with recruiting. They did their job. They got their incentive pay that they earned, and they were all classified as criminals because of a fraudulent investigation that was done by the Army CID. Again, I just don't understand the motivation here. I really don't.
I can't explain the motivation, but from my perspective, the Army invented a crime. They concocted evidence to prove the crime. In many cases, they lied on witness statements to solidify the crime. And then if they couldn't get a civilian prosecutor to take this in court, they just listed the person they investigated as a criminal anyway. So people didn't have just an arrest record. They had an arrest record for felony theft against the United States. Imagine trying to get a job with that on your record.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get bigger than that. I mean, that felony against the United States of America for fraud. I mean, that's, again, it doesn't get more serious than that. And when you begin to, and these guys serve honorable careers. These men and women serve honorable, careers in the National Guard, and in the U.S. Army. And then they get out to this surprise, and that's their way that they have thanked them for their service.
And so many of them were decorated combat veterans. There's a man in Texas with multiple combat injuries, 2 Purple Hearts. His heart is broken over this. He was never arrested, and yet his career was ruined. And he's had good legal assistance and he's had good support, but he's never going to get over the heartbreak that his country betrayed him with no recourse. Who do you go to? You've got a military justice system interfacing with a civilian system. The trial defense services in the Army aren't going to work with the soldiers who are accused and being investigated because they say it's a civilian crime. The civilian attorneys don't understand what's coming at them from the military. And so a lot of these people just were counseled to take a plea. If you're going to be indicted, you're going to have to take a plea because nobody can understand this. It is so complicated and unbelievable.
So some of these soldiers that took a plea, they still have this on their record?
Yes.
And they're innocent.
And they're innocent. They were basically, in my mind, extorted into taking a plea because, and I'm not a lawyer, but as I understand it, if you're charged with identity theft, for each count, I think it's a minimum of 2 years in prison. So if people recruited 6 or 10 or 20 enlistees, and they were charged with wire fraud against or identity theft against each of them. They're going to serve, a lifetime in prison. And their public defender attorneys or their small time attorneys are saying, you got to take a plea, give the government their money back, say you did something wrong, and save your life. And that's what they tried to do, but it didn't really save their life because now they've got a record.
How many veterans would you say that are dealing with this same problem right now, trying to get their records righted for what has been put on them by Army CID? I mean, lives have been ruined here. How many years have these lives been ruined? And is there any way of getting these records reversed and maybe getting these soldiers some sort of reparations for these damages here?
Well, as you know, some of the records are being reversed. That the Army in November said, oh yeah, we mistakenly listed 2,000 people as arrested for crimes when they were never arrested. We're going to correct those records. My sense is that it's far more than just 2,000. I'm guessing it's in the tens of thousands, but it's hard to tell. I've filed all kinds of freedom of information requests, but the Army has regarded this as a personnel matter, and they're not going to fulfill those requests for information. So I don't know. But I do know that people, I've worked with about 12 or 1,500 people over the last 9 years. And I'm hearing from people I've never heard from before who are saying, I just got this letter that says I'm untitled. I didn't even know I was investigated. What else does this mean? And well, it probably means you couldn't get a job for the last 9 years. So these people are due reparations. These people are due, they're never going to get their lives or their careers back, but they should get money for the damage that was done to their potential and their futures and their lives and their families.
We're talking about the character of men and women who have done everything the right way, who have served their country with that honor and courage and commitment, and have gone on to the civilian sector to only be embarrassed and have their names absolutely dragged through the mud. We got a lot of veterans out there that like to shoot, they like to, go target practice, they like to shoot skeet or go hunting or whatever. And these veterans couldn't even buy a weapon. They can't get a weapon rifle because they have this felony on their record that they're like, I didn't do anything wrong here. Like, was there ever any attorneys, big attorneys that got involved here that brought this to the media and said, hey, we need to fix this now?
Yes. There are several attorneys who have got involved in this. And I'd say that Doug O'Connell in Austin, Texas is leading the effort. He understood what GRAP was when it first started happening and was representing people and kept them out of harm's way. But these cases were happening in every state and every U.S. territory. And so there were a lot of attorneys who simply did not understand what was being put in front of them. And CID comes in with an evidence stack that's huge because it's got this handbook that they basically created out of thin air and witness statements. So let me talk about the witness statements for a minute. These agents would go up to an enlistee or a soldier who had been an enlistee 6, 8, 10 years after enlistment and say, who was the first person you gave your social security number to when you joined the Army, National Guard? And these people would, who was the first person who asked for your student ID when you went to college? You don't remember that kind of stuff. And if the recruit said, well, I don't remember, or the recruit named the official Guard recruiter and not the documented recruiting assistant, then that way the CID algorithm led them to conclude that was an indication of fraud. Now, the CID agents didn't go up and say, do you remember Joe Smith? Or did he have any interface with you as you were joining the military. In Luke's case, one of the witnesses said after the fact that he had told the CID agent that he didn't remember Luke's name, but he did remember that he was recruited by a big red-haired guy. Now, the CID agent didn't put that in his report. He simply said that the recruit didn't remember who recruited him. So there was exculpatory evidence that was being left out of these CID reports. And you talk about constitutional damage. It just goes on and on. There was no right to be presumed innocent.
Yeah.
No due process. Most of these were low-level white-collar crimes that had exceeded the statute of limitations, and yet they were prosecuted anyway.
I've heard those words before. Statute of limitations and white-collar, high-level crimes. It's disheartening, and this is frightening. Folks, we're being joined by the executive director of Defend Our Protectors, Liz Ullman, and we're talking about the injustice that has occurred with the GRAP program that has led to the destruction and the lives being ruined of tens and thousands of U.S. Army soldiers and National Guardsmen and women. Now, these arrests, or so-called arrests, and they never knew that they were arrested. They showed up on FBI background checks even. So again, I mean, this is at the highest levels of being, charged with a very, very serious crime against the U.S. government for no wrongdoing. Now, were they convicted of a crime, or were they just labeled as felons, or just because I'm having a hard time seeing if they were actually convicted without, again, having that right to due process and going before a federal judge.
Exactly. Well, that's why I'm saying that this law enforcement agency, Army CID, served as investigator and jury and judge and I say executioner because what they did was kill somebody's future. No, a lot of them never went to court because prosecutors looked at this. A lot of prosecutors looked at this evidence and said, there's no there. There's no crime. I don't understand it. And refused to take the case. So no, these people were never put in front of a judge, never went through the court system, were simply listed by CID as arrested.
So they were convicted of serious crimes that's not the United States of America.
I agree. I'm shocked.
That is not the United States of America, and that's not how law works in this country. And again, that's alarming and that's frightening. And at the end of the day, I can only imagine the emotional and the mental trauma that this has put on these soldiers. Can you clarify on any of that?
Yes. It was enormous. During the first few years of this, as it was beginning to unfold, people would call me night and day and threaten suicide. And I had, by that time, met a lot of soldiers and could get soldiers to call soldiers and try and talk them, off the roof. People were panicked. They didn't understand this, and there wasn't anybody to explain it to them. And just a couple of months ago, I conducted a short question survey and put it on a Facebook page that I run called Stop GRAP Injustice. We asked 4 questions. The first question was, did the GRAP investigation ever lead you to consider or attempt suicide? 74% of the respondents said yes. That should scare everybody. And that should drive Congress to pay attention to this. That we talk about suicide we talk about military, we talk about veterans coming back from combat with PTSD, and that leads them to suicide. We don't talk about their own agencies driving them to consider suicide. And that is, that's a terrible state.
Correct. And unfortunately, I've become the name in the face of VA policy over the last, several years, and, enduring my own hardship and injustice. And, unfortunately, the majority of the messages that I get are veterans that are in crisis mode, and they have these triggering events that either the VA, has put them in, or going through, these injustices here, like the GRAP program. And what people need to understand too is that a lot of veterans, yes, are actually taking their own lives due to the wounds of war. But it's what happens when they get home that may have that triggering event. So a lot of veterans are taking their lives not because of what they saw overseas. It's because of now the life and the position that they've been put in here now at home has driven them to say, I can't continue. I have nothing left to give. My name has been absolutely tarnished. My character has been ruined, and I am embarrassed. And how can I ever survive this? When you have the U.S. government coming down so hard on people that for no reason, and nobody deserved this. Like you said, the tiny bit of fraud, waste, and abuse that was actually detected was minute. But they charge, it's almost as if the people that committed the real fraud kind of got off scot-free. And the people that didn't commit anything, these are the real lives that are lost.
Yes. An Army audit showed that DocuPack, for example, had been overpaid by $9 million, and the government never asked for the $9 million back. And as far as I know, DocuPack never paid it back. DocuPack just changed their name and went into a different line of business, went on with their lives.
Now, you had mentioned that Defend Our Protectors did a short and anonymous survey with some of the GRAP victims. And the first question that you had asked was, has this investigation dampened your emotional and mental health enough for you to consider suicide? And a staggering 74% said yes. Now, you also went on to ask, did GRAP cause or contribute to marital problems? Another 74% of soldiers said yes. Have you been denied job opportunities or employment hardship? And what I mean by employment hardship, I mean professional licensing, where there's background checks being done. 70% of soldiers answered yes. So when you put these anonymous questions out there, the feedback that you have recently gotten back here states that in 2023, this is still a big cause of concern. And we can't forget, this all started back in 2005.
That's when it started. The investigations began right when GRAP was shuttered, and that was in 2012. And the widespread GRAP investigation began in 2014 after this congressional hearing on fraud, waste, and abuse in government contracts. And again, we'll talk about the statute of limitations. GRAP was over and done. Some of these people had their lives ruined over a single $2,000 payment. Is that effective use of government resources? And now the Army and all the branches of the military are having a serious recruitment issue. The last question that we put into our questionnaire is, would you recommend your children or anyone you care about joining the Army? 84% of the respondents said no.
Well, I mentioned this yesterday on the program with Dr. Pete, retired U.S. Army Green Beret, a surgeon, Green Beret, honorable man. And he says, hey, look, we're having major recruitment problems right now in 2023. And I say, well, look at what kids are seeing today and seeing what their parents are going through. And folks like me seeing what my grandparents went through. And, what their grandparents went through from World War II to the Vietnam era, getting spit on when they came home, having Agent Orange destroy their lives, having no accountability, and a lot of these Vietnam veterans dying off of diseases early on, and then living a life of just nothing but struggle and medical, issues as they deal with all these other underlying conditions that the Agent Orange chemicals have put on them. And it took the VA 50 years to even recognize that the Blue Water Navy was even at risk of the same, diagnosis as a lot of these soldiers and Marines that were on the ground fighting in combat in Vietnam. All that Agent Orange was being loaded on ships. Yeah. And these guys were just as much contaminated as everybody else. It took 50 years for Congress to do something about that. Well, they're all dying now, and the majority of them are dead. So again, when kids see this, and when parents see this, and grandparents, when we all live through something like this, and there continues to be this massive systemic issue of betrayal of serving your country, why would you want to sign on that dotted line? And I hate saying I love my country, but do you really think I'm going to help recruit my son to join the military right now? I love him too much to do that. But 10, 15, 20 years ago, I would have said, sure, yeah, go serve your country. But right now, I just feel like we're in a time and place right now that, I just don't have that trust anymore. And that's a very disheartening way to feel. I love my country. I have my flag on my arm. Death before dishonor, and that's always been my creed. And I know that's a lot of creed of a lot of Marines and soldiers and everybody that loves this country, but it's not the country that's failing us. It's the bureaucrats. It's the folks at the highest levels of the government. And I don't know how they can actually sleep at night knowing the destruction that they're doing to so many great, honorable men and women. It really hurts me.
I agree. I don't understand how there is no authority in our government that is over the Army. Why isn't Congress looking at this and seeing how far outside of bounds CID was allowed to operate? These were extrajudicial measures that they took, and in my mind, illegal. There were illegal arrests, obviously. There was dubious evidence. CID agents lied on witness statements. Who is over the Army? Who can look at this law enforcement agency and say you've gone rogue? You've got to change your practices and align them with the Constitution of our country.
Incredible. Now, folks, the GRAP recruiting scandal completely rocked the military community. Now, although the clearing of criminal records years after these false allegations have occurred, there are some big hurdles, bureaucratic hurdles, if you will, still to climb and get over. Now, we had on a retired captain, or soon to be retired captain, De Leon. And he was, I believe, one of the first soldiers that had been cleared of any wrongdoing after years of hardship and what it has done to himself, his character, him not being promoted, and the destruction it really did to his family. Have you been a big supporter of Captain De Leon?
Oh, Gilberto is a remarkable individual. Mm-hmm. I think without his willingness to speak out, we wouldn't be where we are today. So many people who have been crushed by this GRAP investigation are angered and humiliated and afraid to speak out, because if the Army can do this, what else can they do? Gilberto was willing to go loud, and the media picked up his story, and without him shouting it from the rooftops, I don't think the Pentagon ever would have capitulated on these false arrest records. But there is still a very far way to go. Even if you're in the service and you get your criminal record erased and you've been denied a promotion all of these years, you still have to go through a process of clearing your military record, which is another years-long process. So some of these people are never going to be able to resurrect their careers. And those who were washed out lost out on their retirements and their futures in the military. How are we going to make these people whole? And then the people who were denied civilian opportunities, what are we going to do for them? Gosh, I've talked to people who have lost their homes and their families walked out on them, because if you're looked at by a government official for multiple felonies, so many people think, well, you had to have done something wrong, or why would this be happening? There's so much doubt and humiliation that people just hide. So I want to go way out of my way to thank Gilberto De Leon for what he has done for the entire community of GRAP victims.
The livelihoods of so many of contributors, crushed and absolutely destroyed. It truly breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. I am a very emotional man. And it really hurts me to know what this program has done to so many good men and women. Now, I've got a quote from U.S. Army Captain Gilberto De Leon. He says, and I quote, "From this point forward, I would never advocate for anyone to join the military." And that kind of matches up with the 84% that with the polling that you did, with the anonymous polling that you did, that stated that 84% of all those that were a part of this GRAP investigation would agree with that very quote, and that's hard to read. That is hard to read, because we are Americans, and this is the United States of America, and this type of corruption is something that we should never see. Especially in a country where, it's in our national anthem, right? To have, the justice and rights and the Constitution and everything that these men and women fight for. Again, the betrayal here is unreal. So I want to let you know that I'm meeting with Congressman Morgan Luttrell on Monday. And about 6 months ago, he gave me a job. And that job was to identify bills, future bills, inquiries, any investigations. What's the temperature of the veteran community? What's the temperature of the active duty military community? What can I do in Congress to make it a better place? What can we do? And so I put it out there, and I got a stack of papers about that big. And I spent months going through everything, highlighting stuff, removing stuff. Yes, this will work. This probably won't work. And one of the proposals I'm taking into Congressman Morgan Luttrell on Monday is the list of, I'm not going to call them demands, because demands sounds like a very aggressive word, but what you guys would like to see happen as of right now, February 11th of 2023. You guys are asking that, or at least requesting, a House Armed Services Committee needs to hear from those that were impacted by this rogue investigation, if you will, into the Guard Recruiting Assistance Program, other known as GRAP. Now, this is what you guys are asking for. The Army Criminal Investigative Division created a task force, Raptor, in 2014 to create a crime and then identify people that they could accuse of committing a crime. That's what happened. CID took perfectly legal protocols established by a private company and then criminalized them. So this is kind of like a recap. CID agents lied on witness statements. CID agents used evidence that was unverifiable. CID agents harassed and intimidated those that were investigated. CID agents targeted high-profile individuals in an effort to compel others to take a plea. Now, what you guys are asking for right now is a complete and independent investigation of CID to make sure that this never happens again. And you're asking for reparations for those who were damaged by this program. So again, not a list of demands, but kind of like a recap here that I can kind of share with the congressman to let him know about all this stuff that he may not even be aware of. And I don't want to speak for him, but I mean, if I'm a member of Congress and I'm looking at something like this, I definitely have a lot of questions, and I would at least try to pen a letter to see if I can get some sort of response, or at least get the side of Army CID and see where this thing leads us to. So I will most definitely be doing that for you. But you say that there needs to be reparations here for those that were damaged. Now, does the Ferris Doctrine play a role in this and how those reparations may be dispersed?
I don't. Can you explain to me what the Ferris Doctrine is?
Well, the Ferris Doctrine pretty much protects the DOD from any wrongdoing and not paying out any sort of claims for, say, medical malpractice, or, if something bad happened to you in the military, you can't sue them. Essentially, it gives everybody in the military clear immunity, if you will. If you're serving, so the Ferris Doctrine, I think it's like from the 1950s. And it does protect the DOD again from paying out any sort of settlement for wrongdoings committed on their part. So that'll be another question that I will most certainly ask the congressman on Monday. Now, we are about 3 minutes away from wrapping this sucker up. Do you have any final words, Liz?
Well, I want to say that this has actually been the honor of my life to help the individuals who have been impacted by this achieve some sort of justice. And I think that one of the things that Defend Our Protectors has done is help people live through the humiliation and betrayal, because I believe them. I know they did nothing wrong. And I know that helps. I'm a volunteer. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to continue working on it until these people find some sort of justice. And whether the government is immune through the Ferris Doctrine, I don't know, since I'm not a lawyer. The Pentagon admitted that they had made a mistake. Mm-hmm. But they've known for years that they were making mistakes. So there's a certain intentionality of this that I would think would drive Congress to say, we need to fix this on behalf of the people who were impacted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's what they do. They admit fault all the time, because they can without no recourse. And they know that, it's all that's just what happens. And again, you and I are held to standards of accountability and transparency, but it's a one-way street, unfortunately. Now, we're going to end with this. And this is a quote from a couple of quotes from your website. The Army, and especially the CID command, owe it to each and every Guard member whose life has been terrorized and ruined to make them whole again. Do the right thing, and it needs to happen now. Further goes on to say that this domestic attack on the Army National Guard must stop. The Army must own up to their embellished congressional testimony and set the record straight for these men and women. And with that, I would like to thank you so much for joining us on today's program, Liz. We sincerely appreciate everything you have done and continue to do in the military and veteran community. Your service, your sacrifice, and dedication to our great nation is truly admirable.
Thank you so much. And thanks for letting me speak out, Brian. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. The pleasure is all mine. And again, thank you for the strong advocacy work that you are doing in this community.
Thanks.
Folks, remember to stay inspired, stay encouraged, stay motivated, and always stay in the fight. Until next time, for Today with Tally, this is Brian Tally. Good night, Semper Fi.